So I recently came across a video of Sheikh Dr. Muhammad Salah, who features on Huda TV. He responded to a particular question, and I think his answer perfectly encapsulates what we witness with the current Arab Islamic Summit that's taking place in Doha, in Qatar. Inshallah, I'll play the video so that we can watch it for ourselves, watch his answer. But before I do, I just want to give you some basic background. As we know, Qatar was attacked last week by Israel. On the one hand, it's unprecedented, but on the other hand, it fits the perfect MO of how the West operates. That's why I don't buy into this idea that Israel is some sort of rogue nation. They aren't. They follow the exact same playbook as Western nations, and how Western nations are able to achieve their dominance today, how they violate other people's sovereignty, invade, occupy, bomb other countries. Israel is just doing the same thing. And in fact, that's Israel's argument. They're arguing that actually when America bombs so-called terrorists or ISIS within Syria, they're violating the airspace. When they bomb targets within Pakistan, they're violating the airspace. When they've bombed people within Sudan, they're violating the airspace. So we're just doing the exact same thing. This is their argument, by the way. So I don't get this idea that Israel is a rogue nation. No, the whole entire West, America in particular, are rogue nations. They've violated, and they don't even care about this concept of international law. The point is that this issue, in regards to the bombing of Qatar, is extraordinary in at least one particular sense, or as at least two particular sense. Firstly, is that Qatar itself is a Gulf country with huge amounts of wealth and gas resources. I think it's actually one of the biggest gas reserves in the world. Secondly, and really importantly, Qatar hosts the command and control center for American military, some 10,000 US military personnel. So this was seen as a friendly country to the West. Qatar is seen as a friendly country to the West, one which America uses and has used to defend Israel from, and one that was used to launch attacks against Iraq. Qatar is also a country that agreed to pay America $1.4 trillion in protection. They called it trade, but we know what it was really about. It was just about protection. The point is, it's a big deal from that perspective, but it really exposes the state of affairs for this ummah. That even when you bend over backwards for the West, and still you can be bombed, you can still have your sovereignty violated, you literally have to just simply accept and acknowledge that this can occur, this is the state of affairs, and you have to just take it like a good little servant. It's just one big exposure, and also threatens the whole rulers, not just standing in Qatar, but also throughout the Muslim world, because the whole of the Muslim world now has to acknowledge that whether you're considered an enemy or an ally to the West, you could be bombed. You could have, drone strikes. You could have aircrafts being struck against you and your violation of your sovereignty, and nobody will do anything about it. So if they can do this to Qatar, their biggest ally, the one that houses Al Udeid Air Base, they can literally do this across any of the Muslim countries, and the Muslims themselves, ordinary Muslims, I'm saying, they now can see the absolute cowardice of these rulers. They can be abused, they can be, violated in the most be humiliated across the world stage, and yet the Muslim world will still bend over backwards, helping to serve Western and Zionist interests, to do business as usual with them. And it just makes absolute no sense at all to me, and to be honest, to the vast majority of Muslims as well. It's clear as day what's going on. So what Qatar did in deciding to organize this show of strength, inviting 54 Muslim leaders and nations to this conference in order to work out what their powerful response should be to Israel, they did it because it was about face-saving exercise. It's about to try to, puffer them up and to show, we will not be violated like this. And by the way, in the same week that this conference, this Islamic Summit took place in Qatar, we also learned from a United Nations body that investigates genocide that they declared that Israel is definitely doing a genocide within Gaza. This is a body that will also inform the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which is a judicial body of the United Nations, and which is currently investigating whether Israel's committing a genocide. I know they've been investigating for, 2 years now, but this body, this independent body of the United Nations, is there to give recommendations. So we may get a final decision in regards to that. But as we know, the United Nations, international law, all of this has now become completely defunct. Nobody cares about this. The big powers like America and certainly Israel do not care about what international law says, international norms, United Nations, ICJ, or the ICC. They don't care. They're not bothered about this. But at least one thing, at least from the perspective that this body has made this decision, it's taken 2 years, but at least they've made that decision that a genocide is taking place. That's something that you can now use against the Zionists who claim, no, there is no genocide. No, even independent bodies now, even the United Nations, which was, by the way, set up by the Western nations or the most powerful nations, that they themselves have acknowledged that, yeah, what we're seeing is pretty much a genocide. But anyway, that's a whole story in and of itself. So this Islamic conference that took place in Qatar was about how to determine the response from the Muslims themselves. And remember, these Muslim nations, or these rulers of the Muslim nations, and I call them Muslim rulers because they're rulers of Muslims. That's the reality of it. It's not necessarily talking about whether their iman is correct or not correct, whether they're upon the right aqidah or not. That's irrelevant. That's irrespective. The point is they're currently the leading or the rulers of the Muslims. I wouldn't say leaders because they don't act like leaders. They act like followers. But they are in that position, sadly. But remember, as I said, these are people who represent 2 billion Muslims. They have a combined armed forces. Their nations have a combined armed forces that reaches millions. They have control of the airspace, land routes, sea routes that surround Israel. They could literally cut off Israel. And not only that, but they also have trillions of dollars of worth of oil and gas and other goods. They represent, at least in theory, at least they're meant to represent the most powerful combined nations of the Muslims, their resources, their power. So what did they decide? How to deal with this genocidal state that has bombed at least 6 Muslim nations in the past few months, or even past couple of weeks, to be honest. It's not even months. We're talking about weeks. So how are they going to deal with Israel? The axe, and bombs with impunity across the Muslim world, doesn't care about international norms, doesn't care about international law. What are they going to do? And also, what are they also going to do against countries that are aiding the massacre against Muslims, supporting Israel? Israel that is also desecrating the 3rd holiest site of the Muslims, that have engaged in a occupation that's lasted almost 8 decades over the Muslim lands. So what we're expecting? A strongly worded statement? That's it. Literally, that's what they did, was simply issue a statement of condemnation, reaffirm their commitment to international law, call upon a pretty much defunct body of the United Nations to issue some sort of resolution. What a joke. What a joke. We're not talking about small numbers of people. We're not talking about, some weak nation. We're talking about 54 Muslim nations with a combined population of 2 billion. And all they can do is just say, well, this is really bad. Even the Malaysian Prime Minister, this is what's so crazy, when giving his opening statement, he said this.
Our people has become wary of words. They have watched us issue condemnation after condemnation, declaration after declaration, while Israel escalates with impunity. As future generations will ask whether we found the courage to act, we do not ask nations to go beyond their basic obligations.
It's even obvious to the rulers themselves that all they do in these conferences is simply use words of condemnation, and that's it. Nothing happens. Literally nothing happens after it. I don't swear, but wallahi, if I was there, if I was at that conference, I'd have sworn at all of those cowardly bunch. Wallahi, I would have. It just sickens me in my heart how cowardly these rulers are, and how cowardly, as an ummah, we are being led. We're led to this cowardice. It's so sad. Even Mufti Taqi Usmani made this statement in response to the conference. Here's what he said. As expected, the meeting of Muslim countries ended with hollow declarations. The practical proposals put forward by Pakistan, Turkey, Malaysia, etc. could not become part of the joint declaration, and the matter concluded with mere verbal condemnations. If this was all that was to happen, what was the need for such a grand meeting? Now, even the proposals that Turkey gave, which was to implement some sort of harsh economic trade sanctions against Israel and Pakistan mentioned some points about maybe creating a potential Islamic NATO alliance, or Malaysia saying we should remove the diplomats, Israeli diplomats from those countries that have recognized or normalized with them. Even that was pretty pathetic. But even then, they didn't want to do any of that. But inshallah, I'll play the video of the Sheikh. But just before I do, I just want to make one point as well, or one further point, which makes it even worse about this Islamic summit that was going on. Because at the same time, America sent their Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, to go kiss Israel's feet, to show fealty to Israel. These so-called American first government officials worshipping at the feet of the Zionists, literally going there to worship, putting their kippah on and kissing their holy sites or whatever, their holy wall. Anyways, I really want to go into what the Sheikh said. I know I've gone on a bit too much, but his words may not necessarily be directly related to the conference, but in reality, they are directly related to the conference. They're completely spot on. So let me play the video and maybe I'll add some comments as well.
My question today is regarding a verse of the Quran from Surah Al-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 23 and 24. You obviously will know the verse. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا آباءكم وإخوانكم, which the translation here says, "O you who have believed, do not take your father or your brothers as allies if they have preferred disbelief over belief."
Yes.
Yeah, and the second one is the next verse, which is yeah, قل إن كان آباؤكم وأزواجكم
وأبناؤكم قل إن
to the
كان
end of the verse.
آباؤكم وأبناؤكم وأزواجكم وإخوانكم وعشيرتكم.
Yes. Now. So when I went through the tafsir of Ibn Kathir for verse 23, there is a hadith that was quoted there. It says that if you transact, and this is an hadith, it says if you transact in anya, which is a type of riba, and follow the tails of cow and become content with agriculture and abandoned jihad, Allah will send on you disgrace that it will not remove until you return to your religion.
True.
And in my brain, I thought this is quite relating to the current situation.
Absolutely.
The most disgraceful people on earth.
Absolutely. Abdul Hamid, this is what I keep saying. This is what I deliver in Khutbatul Jumu'ah in Arabic and in English. This is the outcome of an ummah which abandoned the peak of this religion.
So just to reiterate what's being said there. So he quotes a hadith from Ibn Kathir. So Ibn Kathir's tafsir quotes this particular hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ talked about where the disgrace of the ummah is. If the ummah decides to engage in a form of riba, or this particular aspect of riba, and also follows the tails of cattle, which basically means that tilling the land, farming the land, and they prefer this, or they abandon jihad in Allah's way, then Allah will disgrace them. And then the caller, he says, isn't this like today? Isn't this exactly what we're seeing today? So I want you to think, isn't it? This 54 Muslim nations, all these Muslim countries that have been bombed, the genocide that we're seeing, these 54 Muslim nations come together in a conference to issue what? Literally nothing. Literally nothing. Disgrace, humiliation. Anyway, Sheikh goes on and he goes, absolutely, this is today.
Every nation, by law, and according to the human rights organizations and the United Nations and the Defense Council, every nation has the right to defend itself. Look what is happening in Ukraine. It's a Christian country and been invaded by the Russians. What happened from the US? What happened from Europe? You see a lot of volunteers, traveling from UK, from France, from Germany, from Canada, from USA, from Australia, dressing up in the military uniform to fight against the Russians. How do the West perceive these activities? Heroic. They are heroes.
So he gives the example, the Sheikh mentions the point. He said, look, even in international law, countries that are attacked are allowed to respond violently, are allowed to respond through physical warfare. If they're under attack, if they're facing a genocide, if Muslims are facing a genocide, they should have the right to respond. This is what he's saying. And then he's mentioning that, look, even amongst international law, and he puts in quotation mark, because he's well aware that this is used when it's beneficial for the West, but they completely break it when it goes against their particular interests. So he's doing that in quotation mark, but he's just trying to show the hypocrisy that even in international law, you're allowed to do this. And then he gives the example, it's an interesting example. He gives the example of Ukraine. He says Ukraine is attacked by Russia. He goes, forget about Ukraine having the right to fight back. He says the Western nations across Europe, Britain, America, Australia even, they have people that will travel to join the Ukrainian army. They're not Ukrainians. They just believe it's a right thing to defend Ukraine against Russian expansion. Whatever, I'm not getting into the whole politics of that discussion, who's right, who's wrong. I'm just simply saying that he's giving the example that they're allowed to travel to defend a people. Now, like I said, United Nations have just declared a genocide. If any people have a right to be defended, it's obviously the Palestinians. The Sheikh then says, how does the West see their own citizens going to Ukraine, putting a Ukrainian army uniform on, fighting against Russia? How do they see them? They see them as heroes. They see them as heroes. They don't stop them. They don't call them terrorists. They don't put them in prison. They don't take away and strip away their citizenship. They see them as heroes. Because for the West, it's in their interest. For the West, they believe it's right that Ukraine should be defended. For the West, they see Russia as a problem. So then he goes on to mention about Muslim countries now, how Muslim countries respond.
In the Muslim ummah, if a person tends to send some food or to protest in any Muslim country in order to say, stop the genocide, that Muslim will be arrested. That Muslim will be detained by Muslim regimes, and they will label him as a terrorist. If any person will dare to speak about jihad, he will be labeled as a terrorist, even though it is a right secured by the United Nations. All nations should enjoy that. This is an occupied territory. The Palestinians are the people of the land. The occupation forces who chose to adopt Judaism as the religion of their state. They occupy Palestine in the name of the Torah, in the name of Judaism. Whether you like it or you don't, this is what they say. They declare themselves as a Jewish state. Okay, so what do Muslims do instead? They trade with them. They give them gas. They buy from them natural gas, and they give them oil. They send food. They send trucks of food from all over the Muslim countries to the occupation forces, and they say, we can't send a bottle of water, a pack of medication to over 2 million Muslims there. Of course, it's a shame. Did anyone say that is not happening?
It's crazy, isn't it? Absolutely crazy. You know, it's so difficult to understand the situation, you know, the level we've fallen to, the type of rulers we have. He says, he gave the example of Ukraine. He said, look, Western nations, Western citizens who are not Ukrainian, going off to fight. He said, if Muslims today, not in the West, but in Muslim countries, wanted to go over and to provide food, forget about even doing any armed struggle, defending against a genocide, but wanted to provide food, they would be arrested by these regimes. If Muslims wanted to protest against a genocide, just to speak out against a genocide in Muslim countries, they'll be arrested. If Muslims wanted to protest against their rulers to say you should be doing more, you'd be arrested. Not just arrested, you'd be called an extremist, you'd be called a terrorist. And then he even says, and if Muslims were to call for jihad, you'd be called a terrorist. By who? Forget the West. He's saying the Muslim regimes are going to call you that. And then he goes on to make the point. He says these regimes, on the one hand, are stopping Muslims from aiding their brothers. But on the other hand, they're going and they're trading with the occupation, with the occupiers, the Zionists. Those who said that they wanted to create a Jewish homeland, a Jewish state, an ethno-racial state, treat Muslims and Arabs as second-class citizens, including Christians. They trade with this entity. They provide them with, food, trucks and food. They sell gas and oil, or with like Turkey with the oil pipeline, or Egypt buys gas from Israel. Have no problems with this. But they have a problem with Muslims. Even if they want you to go and try to cross the border to provide food and medicine, they won't allow it. Let alone the issue of jihad.
The hadith says, when you guys accept to deal with riba, ina, not aina, ina is a form of riba. Okay, we spoke about it before. Okay, and you settle for agriculture and you abandon jihad, Allah will cast disgrace and humiliation upon you. It will not be lifted simply by condemnation or conferences. The Israel will bombard every single Muslim country. In the past few months, Israel bombarded 10 Muslim countries. 10 Muslim countries. Those Muslim countries have all the weapons they need to bombard them back, to fight back. And they're satisfied with saying that we condemn it. Keep condemning until they smash you.
It's crazy, isn't it, what he said there? He said that, look, what is the Muslim rulers, these regimes' response is to have conferences. Like we've just seen, we literally are witnessing this situation. They'll have conferences, they'll have condemnation with words while still trading with them, while still providing them with support, with food, allowing, the airspace to supply them with, and the land routes and the sea routes to supply them with weapons from America and other Western countries. Allow this to take place. And all the Muslim rulers can do is to have a conference and say, well, we condemn this, we condemn that.
And you occupy your lands and your countries. It has become very obvious. Seeing today hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being removed due to the genocide from their homes, and the occupation forces are taking over. Wallahi, Muslim regimes and Muslim countries can put stop to this as of right now. If they stop trade and business, if they kick out all the Israeli ambassadors out of their countries, but they welcome them, they do business with them, all without exception. Okay, so yes, the hadith, not only an assumption, you think that it is applying to today's condition. It is. It is exactly describing today's condition. This condition will not change simply by sitting and making dua. Also, there must be an action. But guess what? We as individuals, me as a professor of Islamic studies, I can only talk about it, raise the awareness, make dua, educate the Muslim ummah.
So he's clear. He makes it quite clear that the Muslim regimes have the capacity. And remember this, although he's not mentioning it quite explicitly, the hadith makes it very explicit, and he's making reference to the hadith because it's not just about stopping trade and kicking out diplomats. The hadith also talks about jihad, and he's making explicit reference to that hadith. So we know what he's saying. We know exactly what he's saying in terms of what the responsibility of these rulers and these nations are, which is to engage in physical warfare to stop a genocide. To stop a genocide, to stop Muslims from being killed. Even if it wasn't genocide, the fact that Muslims are being occupied, they should be liberated. This is the point. Anyway, subhanAllah, man.
Ask people to be united. Sometimes and oftenly, I address the Muslim rulers, have mercy on yourself, not only on your people. Because those people will smash you as well. You don't read history. Unfortunately, most of them are uneducated.
Just really quickly, he also made the point which he said, dua is not enough. Words are not enough. So he's saying you can't just make dua and that's it and expect it without any action. You have to have the action. The action is contained in the ayat of Quran and in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Pretty clear. It's not complicated. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if you engage in the riba, you prefer agriculture and you abandon jihad, you're going to be disgraced. And what we're seeing today, absolute disgrace. They bomb Muslim countries, they commit a genocide, and nothing happens. It's just a disgrace and humiliation.
They don't read, they did not study, they don't know what is going on. They think that as long as I'm an ally with the CIA, with the American whatever, I'm safe. Look at Pervez Musharraf. He died like a dog. After 10 years of serving them, after 10 years of demolishing Pakistan and their economy, once he was dropped, they dropped him like a dog.
So he makes the point as well, which again fits exactly what we're seeing and what we've witnessed with Qatar, which is that they think they're safe because they ally with America. They allow the central command of the American military of the Middle East to exist within Qatar, that they're going to be safe. They will still be smashed. As he makes the point, which is that even in these countries that ally themselves with America, they're still not going to be safe. And he says that because these rulers are effectively uneducated people, ignorant of history, ignorant of politics, and certainly ignorant of Islam. And if they're not ignorant, shame on them even more. That they are willing to know these things and still act the way they act.
I do remember the day that the people revolted against him in the streets.
The Sheikh then also goes on and he gives an example of Pervez Musharraf. But to be quite honest, this could be an example of Musharraf, who is the former leader of Pakistan and dictator of Pakistan. It could be an example of Saddam Hussein. It could be the example of Gaddafi. All of it of very similar examples that even when rulers give their full allegiance to the West, like for example, Musharraf, in his book, he mentioned how he sold his own population, his own citizens, to the Americans to get millions of pounds because, they were declared, or there was claims that they may be extremists or terrorists, that he actually, or Taliban supporters, he sold his own people out to make money. This is how the state of the affairs of the Muslims are today.
And they flooded the streets. It was Condoleezza Rice, the foreign minister back then. She immediately on the same day declared that Mr. Musharraf is not welcome to the United States. We revoked his visa. UK revoked his visa. Not even as a tourist, not even as a refugee. Those people who accept to be servants to those who are destroying and humiliating their people, by the end they will die like dogs. Look what he did. He imprisoned Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan. Instead of treating him like a king, without what Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan, may Allah have mercy on his soul, did, India would have engulfed Pakistan over a few hours. So he put him in prison, and by the end he died like a dog. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on us. I know what I'm saying now is going to put a lot of pressure on me, stopping me from visiting many countries, but seeing what is happening to our brothers and sisters in Palestine makes me feel like, I don't want to go anywhere. I feel like I wish I'm given an opportunity like those Europeans, like those Americans, like those Australians and Canadians who carry arms and they're free to travel to liberate Ukraine. I hope that the Muslim countries would allow the same. If your armies, if your regimes are coward enough to do something, at least let the people do it. We just want to send food. We just want to drop aid.
So that's what the Sheikh says. And, right at the end, he makes the point. He said that if the Muslim rulers and if the Muslim armies are cowards, big strong words, cowards, and don't want to engage with Israel, at least do what America or Britain or Europe does. Allow Muslims to go there with arms, he said. just like them, with arms, to help protect the people from a genocide. And I'll tell you one thing, that if this border was open, if the Muslim regime did not stand in the way, forget about their armies, forget about the military, forget about the fighter jets, forget about the ballistic missiles that the Muslims have, forget about all of these tanks, everything. If they just simply said, you know what, we're not going to stand in any Muslim's way if they want to go and help protect the people of Gaza, I'm telling you, there would be millions of Muslims that would follow in the Muslim world. Millions of Muslims. And this is something we have to be aware of, because I see this sometimes in some of our comments, in some of the videos. The criticisms of the Arab rulers should not be used as a criticism against the Arab or Muslim people. Really important. Whether that is the Gulf Arabs, the people in the Gulf, the people of Saudi Arabia, the Muslims of Saudi Arabia, or any of the other Muslim countries of Egypt, etc. It's not they are the problem, per se. They're prevented, because if these countries did not have such repressive, oppressive actions against their own population, trust me, their own population would rise up and go to Palestine, liberate Palestine, go and defend their brothers and sisters in Gaza. They would do this. And don't just think also that this is, Gaza and Masjid al-Aqsa and Palestine is an Arab problem, and those in Pakistan or Bangladesh or elsewhere somehow, can say, oh, look at the Arabs are doing this, look at the Arabs are doing that. Your own regimes are also complicit. Pakistan uses its air force, for the United Nations and personnel for United Nations peacekeepers. It also allows its air force to be used by Gulf countries, by the regimes of the Gulf countries. If the Pakistani air force can go to the Gulf countries to protect them, supposedly, if America allows it, then why can't they go and protect the Muslims of Gaza? Gaza and Palestine and Masjid al-Aqsa is not an Arab problem. It's a Muslim problem. It's not just a blame upon the Arabs, it's a blame upon the entire Muslim ummah. But we also need to be clear that if the Arabs are complicit, it's not the Arabs, it's Arab rulers. Get rid of this regime, allow the Muslims to go there freely without being restricted, then trust me, the Arabs, the Muslims throughout the whole world will go to Palestine. And this is why they say that the real Israeli Defense Force, the ones who are really defending Israel, are the Arab rulers, are the Muslim rulers. It's not the population. So don't blame the population. Don't get into this sort of almost racist rhetoric to say, oh, the Arabs are this, the Arabs are that. Firstly, it's a Muslim problem. Look at ourselves, wherever we're from. And secondly, it's the regimes. And these regimes were placed there by the West, supported by the West, funded by the West. They carved up Muslim lands into these little statelets to serve the West and to serve Zionist interests. It's these regimes that are standing in the way of Muslims of Egypt, Muslims of Jordan, Muslims of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries to come out physically in support of the Muslims of Palestine. So don't blame, it's the Arab problem and the Arab masses are the problem. It's not, it's the regimes. And these regimes are well aware of the fire in the hearts of many Muslims in their own countries. That's why they're so repressive. That's why they ban protests against what's even happening in Gaza, because they know very quickly it exposes them. Like the Sheikh said, it exposes them because they will prevent Muslims to going there to aid, the Palestinian brothers and sisters, but at the same time are aiding the Zionist entity by defending it, by supplying it with weapons, by supplying it with aid, by supplying it with goods and services. They're willing to do this. It's trading with it. So we need to understand this. I just wanted to, I was thinking, how do I address this issue of the Arab Summit, the Islamic Summit? Because it's obvious, isn't it? It's obvious to everybody it was going to be a complete waste of time. So, I thought because the Sheikh has made these points, and their valuable points, quoting ayat of the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There's something that inshallah should penetrate our hearts, our minds, our understanding, and we should convey this to other Muslims, create a movement of change, because through movements of change amongst the ummah, being unified about the collective idea that inshallah we can start to move and change the type of leadership that we have within the Muslim lands, and in order to utilize and unify our resources in a real sense, including the armed forces, to protect the people of Palestine, protect their blood, protect their honor, protect and establish justice, inshallah.